I never thought I'd be the guy locked out of his hotel room wearing nothing but a towel, but here we are. And not just any towel. This was the flimsy, scratchy kind hotels insist on calling luxury, which, let me tell you, does not help your confidence when you're standing in the hallway hoping nobody walks by. Of course, the moment I realized the door clicked shut behind me and the key card was still in my hand was the exact moment my brain went into full panic mode. It's stupid how quickly everything goes downhill from "I'm having a great weekend" to "I might actually die of embarrassment" in less than 30 seconds. I was supposed to be on this trip for work, a conference in Chicago, but honestly, the conference was just a convenient excuse to get away from my usual routine and, well, meet some new people. I had no idea that the person I'd end up meeting would end up making this weekend unforgettable in a way I never expected. His name's Evan, by the way. I met him earlier that evening in the hotel bar. He's the kind of guy who walks in and just owns the room without even trying. Tall, with this messy, dark hair that looks like he just rolled out of bed but somehow still manages to look effortlessly cool. He had this easy smile that made me feel like he wasn't just being polite when he nodded at me and said, "Hey," over the rim of his glass. We started talking about the dumbest things at first. Favorite pizza toppings, whether pineapple belongs on pizza. Spoiler, he's team pineapple, which I still can't decide if I respect or not. And then it turned into more. The kind of conversation where you lose track of time and suddenly it's nearly midnight and the bar is empty except for the two of us. I could tell he wasn't just interested in killing time either, which honestly made me nervous. I'm not exactly a master of smooth moves, and here I was hoping to just get through the weekend, looking somewhat competent. After a few more jokes and a lot of awkward laughter, he invited me back to his room. I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into, but something about the way he looked at me made me say yes without overthinking it. It felt like the kind of thing you either jump into or regret forever, you know? So now, here I am, wrapped in this half-dried towel, standing outside my own hotel room door, because apparently, in my nervousness, I managed to shut the door without my card and locked myself out. And the worst part? Evan is knocking on the door just down the hall, probably thinking I've vanished into thin air, or worse, that I'm the world's biggest idiot. I'm trying to figure out if I should call the front desk and confess that, yes, I'm the guy who got locked out in a towel, or if I should try to sneak to his room hoping no one else is in the hallway. But let's be real, there's no sneaking past the dim, quiet corridor of a hotel at night without attracting some kind of attention. I'm stuck, literally and figuratively, and honestly, I've never felt more alive or more ridiculous at the same time. I peeked around the corner toward Evan's door, hoping to catch a glimpse of him without looking like a total creep. He was standing there, one hand pressed to the door, the other holding his phone like he was about to call someone. His brow was furrowed, and there was this weird mix of concern and amusement on his face, which honestly made me feel a little better. If he was laughing at me inside, at least it was a friendly laugh. "Need some help?" he called down the hall, voice low but clear. I swallowed hard and forced out, "Yeah, you could say that." Locked myself out. He chuckled softly. "In a towel?" Unfortunately. I gave a little shrug, which was mostly just an excuse to adjust the towel and make sure it wasn't about to fall off. Classic me. "Wow, you're really living the dream tonight, huh?" His grin was audible now. I groaned. "Yeah, well, at least I'm consistent." He glanced down at his own door, then back at me. "You want me to come out? I mean, I could lend you a shirt or something." The idea of Evan walking out into the hallway shirtless or even in casual clothes felt bizarrely intimate, and maybe that was what made me hesitate. What if this was all just a weird fluke and he thought I was some awkward weirdo? But honestly, standing there in a towel wasn't helping my case either. "Sure, if you're not busy being a responsible adult or whatever," I said, trying to sound casual. There was a pause, then footsteps approaching. Evan appeared from around the corner, wearing a soft gray t-shirt and jeans. His expression a mix of concern and that easy charm that had me pretty much hooked since the bar. He held out the shirt like some kind of peace offering. I took it gratefully. "Thanks. You're a lifesaver." Yeah, he said with a grin. "But you owe me one now. Maybe a drink? Or pizza? I need to redeem myself after this whole towel incident." I laughed, the tension easing a bit as I pulled the shirt over my head. It was way too big, sleeves hanging past my elbows, but honestly, it felt like luxury compared to the towel. "Deal," I said. "But first, I gotta get back inside my room." Evan nodded and pulled out his phone. "I'll call the front desk while you stand guard. You know, so no one else accidentally catches a glimpse of you." "Appreciate it," I said, feeling strangely grateful for his company. Standing there alone would have been way worse. A minute later, a hotel staff member showed up with a master keycard and a quiet apology for the inconvenience. I unlocked the door, waved off the thanks, and stepped inside, closing the door behind me. I turned and found Evan leaning casually against the frame, watching me with that same easy smile. "So, now that you're dressed, should we actually talk about whatever this is?" he asked. I laughed, running a hand through my still damp hair. "I was hoping you'd say that." We moved into the room, and the conversation picked up where it left off at the bar. There was something about the way Evan listened that made me want to open up, not just about the usual small talk, but about the stuff that usually gets stuck somewhere in the back of my head. He talked about his job in graphic design and how he'd moved to Chicago a few years ago after a messy breakup. I shared some stories about my own work, boring spreadsheets and client meetings, but also the parts one actually liked, like the chance to travel sometimes. At one point, the mood shifted when he slid closer on the couch, the distance between us shrinking in a way that made my heart beat faster without me even realizing it until it was happening. "Can I be honest?" he said quietly. "Always," I replied. He smiled, a little shy now. "You're kind of different from the other guys I usually meet. Like, you seem real. And I don't mean in a cheesy way. I mean, it's like you're not pretending to be someone else." I blinked, caught off guard. "That's probably because I'm awkward as hell and can't fake it even if I wanted to." He laughed, but it was soft, affectionate. "Good, because I'm tired of pretending too." We sat there for a moment, the kind of silence that isn't awkward but charged, like waiting for something neither of us wanted to rush but both hoped would come. Eventually, Evan reached out and brushed a damp strand of hair off my forehead. "So what do we do now? Besides locking yourself out in a towel again, I mean." I grinned, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the heating in the room. "Maybe we start with pizza, and then figure it out from there." He nodded, and just like that, the weird, embarrassing start to the night felt like the best thing that had happened in a long time. Because sometimes you get locked out in a towel, and sometimes that's exactly how you get locked into something real. We ended up ordering from that little local pizza place Evan swore had the best deep dish in the city, and while we waited, we just kept talking. It was one of those moments where you're so comfortable with someone that even silence doesn't feel awkward. We sank into the couch, leaning against each other like it was the most natural thing in the world. I don't think I've ever talked this much with someone I just met. Usually, I'm the guy who sticks to safe topics and nods politely, but Evan had this way of making me feel like whatever was coming out of my mouth was worth hearing. Maybe it was just that he was genuinely interested, or maybe it was the combination of the late hour and the fact that I wasn't standing in a hallway in a towel anymore. When the pizza finally arrived, Evan insisted on paying, but I grabbed the box anyway. "Next time I'm picking up the tab," I said, trying to sound confident even though my stomach was fluttering. He smiled and tossed me a slice. "Deal." We ate like teenagers, sneaking snacks in a dorm room, laughing at how ridiculous the whole night had become. At one point, I caught him looking at me in that way again, that soft, thoughtful gaze that made me wish I had a pause button. "So why did you really come to Chicago?" he asked, mustard from his slice accidentally smudging on his lip. I wiped it off for him, feeling the heat rush to my cheeks. "Honestly, I wanted to get out of my own head for a bit. Work's been a lot, and I guess I was hoping to meet someone who didn't think I was a total dork." Evan laughed, but it wasn't mocking. "Good news, I'm a dork too." "Perfect," I said, grinning. "Does that mean we're a perfect match?" He nudged me playfully. "Maybe." The night stretched on, and when it got too late to keep chatting without turning into zombies, Evan stood up and stretched. "You gonna be okay crashing here, or should I make room on the couch?" I hesitated, the weight of the moment settling in. "Honestly, I don't want to be alone tonight." He caught the vulnerability in my voice and gave me one of those reassuring smiles. "All right, you can stay." but only if you promise not to lock yourself out again. I laughed, the tension finally breaking. I'll try. He pulled back the covers on the pull-out couch and handed me a pillow. Don't worry, I'm not weird about this kind of thing. As I made my way to the couch, I felt a strange sense of peace. Sure, the night had started with me standing in a hallway wrapped in a towel, but it was ending with something that felt a whole lot better than just a dumb mistake. Before I settled in, Evan stopped me. Hey, you okay? I looked up at him, feeling that mix of something like hope and nervousness. Yeah, I'm good. Better than good, actually. He smiled, then surprised me by sitting down beside me on the couch, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. Good, he said softly, because I'm thinking this might be the start of something. I felt my heart skip, and for once I didn't try to hide it. Me too, I said. We fell asleep there, side by side, and in the quiet darkness, I realized that sometimes the most embarrassing moments lead to the best stories, and maybe something a little more. Morning sunlight crept through the thin curtains, casting a soft glow over the room. I woke up with a slightly stiff neck and the unmistakable feeling that someone was still there. Evan was sprawled on the couch beside me, his arm thrown over his forehead like he was shielding himself from the sun, or maybe just trying to hold on to sleep a little longer. The whole scene felt surreal, like I'd accidentally wandered into a rom-com and forgot my lines. I didn't want to move too much and risk waking him up, so I just lay there, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. For a moment, I let myself pretend this wasn't going to end when the weekend did. That maybe this weird, accidental connection had a chance to grow beyond the hotel walls and awkward towel incidents. Eventually, Evan stirred, blinking his eyes open as if he wasn't quite sure where he was. When he caught sight of me still lying there, a slow grin spread across his face. "Morning," he mumbled, voice still thick with sleep. "Morning," I replied, sitting up and stretching. "Sleep well?" "Like a rock," he said, before adding, "So you gonna tell me how you managed to lock yourself out in a towel? Because I'm pretty sure that's not in the hotel's emergency procedures." I laughed, the memory of standing outside the door feeling both embarrassing and kind of hilarious. "Let's just say I'm talented in ways no one should be." He shook his head, amused. "You're impossible." "Yeah, I get that a lot," I said, then paused. "But thanks for letting me crash here. Don't think I'd have survived the night another way." Evan's grin softened. "Hey, I'm glad you stayed." Couldn't exactly let you wander the halls that way. There was a warmth in his eyes that made the room feel a little smaller, a little more intimate. I wasn't sure if it was the morning light or just the way he looked at me, but suddenly I felt like maybe this wasn't just a weekend fling waiting to fizzle out. We ended up grabbing coffee downstairs a little later, stumbling upon a cozy cafe just around the corner. Over steaming mugs and flaky pastries, the conversation shifted again. Deeper this time, touching on hopes and fears and the kind of things you usually keep tucked away. Evan told me about the art he was working on, how he loved creating pieces that told stories without words. I shared some of my own dreams, ones I hadn't admitted out loud in a while, about maybe trying something different with my career, or just living in a place that felt like home. There was a moment when we both just looked at each other, like realizing we weren't alone in wanting something more. "So what happens after today?" I asked, half nervous, half hopeful. He shrugged, but his smile was steady. "I don't know, but I want to find out. If you're in, I'm in," I said without hesitation. The rest of the day flew by in a blur of laughter, long walks through the city, and more pizza, because apparently Evan knows all the good spots. It felt like we'd known each other longer than just a few hours, and that weird, towel-locked-out moment was some bizarre prologue to what was becoming something real. Back in the hotel that evening, as we said our goodbyes, because I had to catch an early flight the next morning, Evan pulled me into a hug that felt like a promise. "Text me," he whispered. "I will," I said, my heart already aching at the thought of leaving. As I walked away, suitcase in hand, I realized that sometimes life's most awkward moments aren't the ones to dread. They're the ones that open the door. And honestly, I can't wait to see what comes next. The airport was a blur of noise and movement. The usual chaos I tried to avoid. but somehow always got pleased-me'd into. My mind kept drifting back to that last hug, Evan's warmth still lingering on my skin like a quiet reminder that, yeah, this weekend had been something different, something better. I found a corner to sit and pulled out my phone, fingers trembling a bit as I typed a message. Simple, nothing cheesy, just, "Hey, got home safe. Thanks for everything." I hit send, then stared at the screen like I had just launched a spaceship into orbit. Seconds later, his reply buzzed in, "Glad you made it. Can't wait to see you again." I smiled, a real stupid grin, and felt a little spark of hope grow inside me. The following week was a strange mix of ordinary and extraordinary. Back at work, everything felt the same. The meetings, the emails, the endless to-do lists, but my phone kept lighting up with texts from Evan. Some were silly, memes of cats wearing tiny hats, jokes about Chicago weather, but others were real, like when he'd ask how my day was going or share something that reminded him of our conversations. It wasn't the kind of thing I was used to. Usually I kept my personal life on a tight leash, but with Evan, it felt like the leash had been cut loose and I was free to be, well, me. One evening, after a particularly long day, I found myself scrolling through our messages more times than I care to admit. Then, on impulse, I typed, "What are you doing right now?" Almost immediately, his reply came back. "Thinking about how I wish you were here." My heart did that ridiculous fluttering thing again. I typed back, "Me too." Before I could overthink it, I added, "Want a video call?" He was quick to say yes, and soon his face filled my screen. Messy hair, that crooked smile, eyes that looked like they were holding a secret. We talked for hours, sharing stories I never told anyone else, laughing at stupid jokes, and just being there for each other. In a weird way, the distance didn't feel so big when we connected like that. A week later, I found myself booking a flight back to Chicago. This time, no towel incidents, no awkward hallway moments, just me, hoping that what we had could grow into something real. Evan met me at the airport with that same grin that had drawn me in from the start. We spent the weekend exploring the city, finding little coffee shops, wandering through art galleries, and stealing kisses beneath the glow of streetlights. But it wasn't just the fun stuff. It was the quiet moments, too. Like when we'd sit on his couch, talking about our fears and dreams, or when he held my hand a little tighter during a crowded subway ride. There was something about being with him that made all the messy parts of life feel manageable. One night, as we sat watching the city lights twinkle through his apartment window, Evan turned to me, eyes serious but soft. "I'm really happy you came back," he said. "Me too," I replied, feeling my chest tighten. He reached out and tucked a stray hair behind my ear. "I don't want this to be just a weekend thing anymore." I swallowed, the weight of his words settling in. Neither do I. We leaned in, the world narrowing down to just us, and I realized that sometimes the most unexpected stories, the ones that start with a locked door and a towel, can lead to the best beginnings. The days after that weekend felt like something out of a dream I didn't want to wake up from. Evan and I fell into a rhythm that surprised me. Long morning texts, late night calls, planning our next visit before one of us even left. I wasn't used to this kind of connection, especially not with someone I barely knew a month ago, but it felt right. And then came the real challenge. I live on the East Coast, with a job that's tied to an office, and a life that's not exactly flexible. Evan's world was in Chicago, and as much as I wanted to leap into something new with him, I wasn't sure how to make the distance work without losing myself or him. One night, after a particularly frustrating day where I was stuck in endless meetings and my brain felt like mush, I called him. His familiar face lit up the screen, and just seeing him was a balm. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted, voice low. "The distance, the time zones. I want this to work, but it's scary, like I'm risking too much." Evan nodded, eyes serious. "I get it. I'm scared too, but I think if it's worth it, we'll figure it out. Together." His words gave me a little courage, but I still felt the weight of uncertainty hanging over us. The next weekend, I flew back to Chicago. We spent the whole time talking about what we wanted, what we were willing to try. Evan made it clear he was willing to be patient, that he wanted to build something that lasted. We walked through Grant Park, the city skyline glowing behind us, and I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just a fling or passing fancy. With him, everything felt bigger, more possible. One afternoon, sitting in a quiet corner of a bookstore, Evan surprised me by pulling out a small notebook. Inside, he'd been sketching places he wanted to take me, plans for future adventures, little notes about things that reminded him of me. It was the kind of gesture that made my heart catch. "I've been thinking," he said softly, "maybe you could come here more often. Or maybe I could come there. We find a way." I smiled, feeling hopeful for the first time in a long while. I want that. Back in my hotel room that night, I realized how far I'd come since that ridiculous towel incident. What started as an embarrassing mistake had somehow turned into something I didn't want to let go of. The next morning, as I packed my bags, Evan pulled me into a hug that spoke louder than any words. "No matter what happens, I'm glad we found each other." "Me too," I whispered. Stepping onto the plane, I felt a mix of nerves and excitement. Love isn't always easy, especially when there are miles between you. But with Evan, I was ready to take the leap. Because sometimes, the best stories start with a locked door and a towel, and end with a chance at something real. The weeks that followed felt like a strange kind of dance, one where Evan and I tried to figure out the steps without stepping on each other's toes. There were flight schedules, late-night calls that stretched into the early mornings, and a lot of "I miss you" texts that made my heart ache in the best possible way. But there were also moments where the distance felt like a wall we couldn't quite climb. One rainy Thursday, I was holed up in my apartment, swamped with work, when my phone buzzed with a message from Evan. "We need to talk." My stomach twisted for a second. Was something wrong? Did he have second thoughts? I typed back, "What's up?" A few minutes later, his face popped up on a video call. His eyes looked a little tired, but there was that same sincerity I'd come to love. "I've been offered a pretty big project here," he said, running a hand through his hair. "It's exactly what I want to do, but it means more hours and probably less time for us." I nodded slowly. "That sounds amazing, Evan. But yeah, I get why you're worried," he sighed. "I don't want to lose what we have, but I'm scared I'm going to mess it up." I smiled, trying to be the steady one, even though my heart was pounding. "We'll figure it out. We always do." We spent the next hour talking, making plans to carve out time for each other, promising to be honest when things got tough. It wasn't a perfect fix, but it was real. A few days later, I found myself on a flight to Chicago again, ready to see him and remind myself why it was worth the effort. When I landed, he was waiting with that familiar grin, and I felt my worries melt away. We spent the weekend exploring new parts of the city, sharing meals, and just being together in a way that made all the distance fade into the background. One evening, as we sat on his balcony watching the city lights flicker, Evan took my hand. "I'm glad you kept coming back," he said softly. "Me too," I replied, squeezing his hand. "I don't want this to be just a chapter. I want it to be everything." He smiled, and in that moment, I knew we were ready to write the next part of our story together, no matter where it took us. After that weekend on the balcony, things started to shift in a way I hadn't quite expected. We both realized that the distance wasn't just some inconvenient hurdle. It was a real challenge that forced us to decide what we actually wanted. And somewhere between late-night calls and airport runs, Evan and I began talking about the future, what it might look like if we tried to make this work beyond weekends and stolen moments. It was a lot to process. I'd never seriously thought about uprooting my life before. My job, my family, my friends, they were all here on the East Coast. But every time I thought about the idea of living somewhere else, Chicago felt less like a foreign place and more like a potential home, because Evan was there. One evening, after a particularly long workday, I found myself staring at my phone, rereading a text from Evan. "Are you sure about this? Because I want you to be happy, not just chasing me." I knew he wasn't trying to push me or guilt trip me. It was just his way of making sure I wasn't making a decision out of panic or loneliness. And honestly, I didn't have a clear answer yet. I called him, and his face appeared on the screen, already tired but lighting up when he saw me. "I've been thinking a lot," I confessed, "about moving here." He was quiet for a moment, eyes searching mine like he was trying to read my soul. That's a big step. I know, I said. But with you, it feels like something I want to try, even if it's scary. Evan smiled, and it was that kind of smile that makes you forget to breathe. Then we figure it out, together. From there, everything felt like a whirlwind. I started looking into job opportunities in Chicago, reached out to some contacts, and made tentative plans to visit for longer stretches. It wasn't easy. There were moments when doubt crept in, nights when missing home felt overwhelming, but Evan was always there, steady and encouraging. One weekend, a few months later, I was in Evan's apartment helping him hang some artwork. The room was filled with the smell of fresh paint and the soft hum of the city outside. As I stepped back to admire his work, he caught my hand and pulled me close. "Ready for the next chapter?" he asked, his voice warm. I nodded, heart pounding. "Yeah, I think I am." A few weeks after that, I handed in my resignation at work. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Leaving behind the familiar to chase something uncertain wasn't the easiest choice, but it felt necessary. Evan met me at the airport when I arrived in Chicago for the last time as a visitor. We hugged so tightly I thought the world might stop. "This is it," I whispered. "For real this time," he said, eyes shining. Moving in with Evan wasn't just about sharing a space. It was about building a life together. There were awkward moments, like figuring out who took out the trash or which way the toilet paper roll should go, but mostly, it was about learning each other's rhythms and growing comfortable in the silence. One lazy Sunday, as we lay tangled up on the couch, I looked over at him and realized how far we'd come, from that ridiculous towel incident in a hotel hallway to this, two people who'd taken a chance and found something worth holding on to. "Hey," I said softly. He turned to me, curious. "Thanks for sticking around. For believing in us." He smiled, brushing a thumb over my cheek. I never doubted it, and in that moment, I knew that sometimes life's messiest moments lead to the best stories, the kind you never want to end. Weeks turned into months, and with every passing day, Evan and I settled deeper into our new life together. The awkwardness of merging habits and routines faded, replaced by a quiet comfort that felt like home. I found a job that challenged me but didn't swallow me whole, and Evan's art continued to flourish in the city we now shared. One evening, after a lazy Saturday spent wandering through a local park, we found ourselves sitting on a bench overlooking the river as the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over everything. Evan nudged me gently, a familiar smile tugging at his lips. "You know," he said, "I was thinking about that night you got locked out in a towel." I laughed softly, shaking my head. How could I forget? Not exactly my finest moment. He reached over and squeezed my hand. But it's funny how that ridiculous moment led us here. I mean, all the awkwardness, the distance, the doubts. It was worth it. I looked at him, feeling the weight of those words settle in my chest. It really was. I never thought I'd take a chance like this, but with you, it just feels right. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. It wasn't a grand gesture or a dramatic declaration, just two people who had found each other in the messy, unpredictable way life often works. Later that night, as we cooked dinner side by side in our small kitchen, I realized that love wasn't about perfection or fairy tale moments. It was about showing up, embracing the awkwardness, and choosing each other despite the uncertainties. Evan caught my eye across the counter and smiled. "So, what's next for us?" I grinned back, feeling a warmth that went beyond the room or the city outside. "Whatever we decide to make it." And for once, I wasn't scared about the unknown. Because sometimes, the best stories don't come from flawless beginnings. They come from being brave enough to stay, to grow, and to love through all the unexpected twists. Standing there with Evan, I knew this was exactly where I was meant to be.